Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was upgraded with cybernetic enhancements after losing his body. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint was a toxic cocktail of ozone, dust, and blood. It was thick and heavy, clinging to the back of the throat, a constant reminder that this was no simulation. This was a siege. For Izuku Midoriya, the world had devolved into a series of frantic, desperate calculations. His mind, a frantic library of hero knowledge, was flipping through pages faster than he could process, searching for an answer that wasn't there. The professional heroes weren't coming. All Might wasn't coming. 13 was down, Aizawa was broken, and Class 1A was scattered, fighting a guerrilla war against an army of thugs with the desperate courage of cornered animals. The delay, Kurogyari had gloated, was their masterstroke. A secondary incident, a simple but effective diversion across town, had drawn the bulk of UA's faculty away. The communications jammer they were using was a military-grade device, far more powerful than the students' initial assessment. They were an island, cut off and sinking fast. At the heart of the storm, in the central plaza, stood the cause of their impending doom. The Nomu. It wasn't just a monster. It was an abomination of physics. A hulking beast of scarred muscle and exposed brain, its eyes were vacant, dead things set in a face like a blackened bird's skull. It had defeated Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, not with cunning or skill, but with the brute, simple fact of its existence. Aizawa's quirk, a tool for leveling the playing field, was useless against a creature that was a living cheat code. It had shock absorption and hyperregeneration. It was a walking paradox designed for one purpose, to kill the symbol of peace. And in All Might's absence, it had found new toys. He's getting bored, Kurogyari, Tamura Shigaraki rasped, his voice a dry scratch that grated on the nerves. He was perched on the edge of the fountain, scratching furiously at his neck, his red eyes fixated on the Noma. The creature had Aizawa pinned beneath its massive foot, the pro-hero's blood painting a gruesome halo around his head. He was still conscious, just barely, his one good eye glaring with defiant fury. Nomu, Shigaraki commanded, his voice dropping to a low, sinister pitch. Let's play a game. Break his other arm. Slowly. The Nomu didn't respond, but it shifted its weight. A wet, cracking sound echoed through the plaza, sharp and final. Aizawa grunted, his body convulsing, but he refused to scream. The sound was swallowed by the terrified gasps of Tsuyu Azui and Minoru Mineta, who were half submerged in the water nearby, frozen in sheer terror. Deku, hidden behind a decorative planter with Ochiko Uraraka and Tenya Ida, felt bile rise in his throat. His legs, already strained from his earlier fight with Kurogyari, trembled uncontrollably. Every instinct, every fiber of his being, screamed at him. Do something. A hero does something. But what? His mind raced. Analysis. Nomu's abilities are a direct counter to physical force. It absorbs impact. Even All Might would have trouble. My quirk, one for all, is pure physical force. At 5%, I'd be a fly swatting a brick wall. At 100% I break. I become a liability. There's no strategic advantage. It's illogical. It's suicide. What do we do, Deku? Uraraka whispered, her face pale. Her eyes were wide with a horror that mirrored his own. We must wait for the professionals, Ida stated, his voice tight with forced formality, a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos. To engage that creature would be foolish and needlessly risk our lives. Ida was right. Logically, he was completely correct. But Deku wasn't looking at the situation with logic anymore. He was looking at his teacher, a man who had thrown himself in front of an army to protect them, being tortured. He was looking at Tsuyu, her long tongue darting out nervously, her composure finally cracking as the Noma's dead-eyed gaze drifted towards her. You know, Shigaraki mused, standing up and stretching like a bored cat. The main boss isn't here. This is starting to feel like a glitch. A badly designed game. Maybe I should just get a game over for some of these NPCs to speed things up. He pointed a decaying finger at the water. Noma. Kill the frog. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The command hung in the air, a death sentence delivered with casual indifference. The Nomu, ever obedient, lifted its foot from Aizawa's mangled form and turned. Its massive, disproportionate body moved with an unnatural speed, covering the distance to the water's edge in a single, ground-shaking step. Tsuyu's eyes widened. She tried to scramble back, but her limbs were locked with fear. Mineta was already sobbing, fat tears rolling down his face. There was no time. No time for a plan. No time for logic. No time for fear. In that frozen moment, Deku's frantic internal monologue ceased. The library of hero knowledge slammed shut. All the analysis, all the calculations, all the careful percentages vanished, replaced by a single, blazing certainty forged in the heart of a 9-year-old boy watching a video of All Might saving 100 people from a fire. I have to save them. The green lightning of One for All, an energy that was still so alien to his body, erupted around him. It wasn't the controlled 5% he had been practicing. This was a floodgate thrown open, a dam bursting. He felt his muscles scream in protest, the fibers tearing and snapping before he even moved. He ignored it. Midoriya, no! Ida shouted, reaching for him, but Deku was already gone. He pushed off the ground, and the concrete beneath his feet shattered. He wasn't running, he was a missile, a green and black blur of pure, unrestrained power. The world became a smear of color and sound. He saw the Nomu's arm, a weapon of solid muscle, swinging down towards Tsuyu. He saw her terrified face, a still frame in the chaos. His own arm was drawn back, the sleeve of his costume already shredding from the sheer pressure radiating from his skin. The bones in his fingers, his wrist, his forearm, they were already beginning to fracture, screaming a silent chorus of agony. One for all, 100%. Delaware smash. His fingers flicked forward. The resulting air pressure was not a targeted blast. It was a concussion, a physical explosion of force that ripped through the plaza. The water in front of the Nomu erupted upwards in a 20-foot geyser, as if a depth charge had gone off. The sheer power of the blast struck the Nomu's descending arm and chest. For a glorious, impossible second, it worked. The Nomu, a creature that had absorbed Aizawa's attacks like a sponge, was actually thrown back. It stumbled, its massive form sliding several feet across the stone plaza, its arm knocked off course. The attack on Tsuyu was averted. Deku landed, his right leg immediately shattering under the strain of his momentum. A sound like a bag of marbles being crushed echoed from his ankle, and he collapsed onto his knee. Pain, white-hot and absolute, flared up his nervous system. His right arm was a ruined mess. From the tips of his fingers to his shoulder, the skin was a deep, bruised purple, the bones inside little more than gravel in a sack of flesh. He couldn't feel his fingers, but he had done it. He had pushed it back. He had saved her. A wave of dizzying relief washed over him, so potent it almost made him pass out. Through the haze of pain, he saw Shigaraki staring, his hand paused midway to his neck. For the first time, the villain's bored demeanor was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise, quickly curdling into annoyance. Shock absorption, you said, Shigaraki said, his voice dangerously low. You didn't say it could be knocked back. Kurogyri, our toy is defective, the Nomu righted itself. It looked down at its chest, where the force of the blast had hit. There was no wound. No blood. The skin seemed to ripple for a moment, and then it was still. It turned its head, the motion stiff and unnatural, and its vacant eyes locked onto Deku. There was no anger in its gaze. No malice. There was nothing. And that was the most terrifying part. It was a program that had encountered an error, and was now moving to correct it. Deku tried to push himself up, to get away. But his right arm was useless, and his right leg was a disaster. He was trapped. It's not enough, a cold voice of dread whispered in his mind. It wasn't enough. He had one arm left. His left arm. It was a stupid, desperate thought. One for All was already ravaging his body from a single attack. To use it again, so soon, with his body already past its breaking point. What would happen? He didn't have time to consider the question. The Nomu was upon him. It moved faster than he could have imagined, a mountain of flesh closing the distance in a heartbeat. He saw its hand, bigger than his head, reaching for him. No choice. With a guttural scream that was half defiance, half agony, he channeled the power again. The green lightning, angrier this time, enveloped his left arm. He didn't even have time to name the attack. He just swung, a wild, desperate haymaker aimed at the creature's head. This time, the Noma was ready. It didn't absorb the blow. It caught it. Its massive, five-fingered hand closed around Deku's fist. The crunch was sickeningly loud. Deku felt the bones in his hand, his wrist, his forearm, shatter instantly, not from the power of his own quirk, but from the vice-like grip of the monster. The force of his own punch, with nowhere to go, rebounded back into his own arm. He felt a snap in his shoulder as it dislocated, and another in his clavicle. The pain was a physical entity, a nova of pure sensation that erased thought. His vision went white, but the Noma wasn't done. Shigaraki had given a command. Break him. The creature was simply following its programming. It held his ruined left arm in its grip, and with its other hand, it took hold of his right. The one that was already broken. It gripped his bicep, its thick fingers sinking into the bruised flesh. Then it pulled. The sound was not a snap. It was a wet, heavy tear. A sound of sinew and muscle and ligament being ripped apart. From across the plaza, Uraraka screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure horror. Bakugo, who had just finished dispatching a group of villains near the entrance, froze, his explosions dying in his palms. His crimson eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't a fight. This was a butchering. The Nomu tore Deku's right arm from its socket. Blood sprayed, hot and shockingly plentiful. Deku's mind, which had been blissfully blank with pain, rebooted with a jolt of unimaginable agony. He was suddenly, horrifically aware. He was a slab of meat on a butcher's block. He saw his own arm, a mangled, bloody appendage still clutched in the monster's hand. The creature regarded it for a moment with its dead eyes before casually tossing it aside. It landed with a wet slap on the stone floor, a discarded toy. DKU, Uraraka's voice. Ida's. Tsuyu's. They were a distant chorus of terror. The Noma still held his left arm. It adjusted its grip, moving from his shattered hand to his forearm. Its other hand came down and clamped onto his left leg. Deku thrashed, a primal, animalistic survival instinct taking over. But it was like a worm struggling against a steel clamp. No. No, 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 no. Another pull. Another sickening, wet rip. His left leg was torn away at the hip. His world tilted, the plaza spinning violently. The pain was so immense, so total, it looped back on itself and became a strange, floating numbness. He could feel the hot gush of blood from his wounds, see the growing crimson pool spreading beneath him. He was becoming detached, an observer to his own gruesome destruction. This is it. This is how I die. The thought was surprisingly calm. From his vantage point, Katsuki Bakugo was paralyzed. His entire life had been defined by strength, by dominance. He was meant to be the strongest. Deku, the quirkless, useless pebble in his path, had somehow gained this insane, self-destructive power, and for a moment, Bakugo had felt a surge of familiar, infuriating rage. But what he was watching now transcended rivalry. It transcended anger. It was an absolute, methodical negation of a human being. The Noma was dismantling Deku with the same dispassionate efficiency one might take apart a piece of furniture. It was breaking him down into his component parts. And the worst part? The look on Deku's face. After the initial scream, after the shock, there was just a quiet surrender. The light was going out in his eyes. You fucking monster! Bakugo roared, his voice cracking. He blasted himself forward, raw fury overriding any sense of self-preservation. Kirishima was right beside him, his body hardened, a look of grim determination on his face. Todoroki, from the landslide zone, sent a massive wave of ice surging towards the plaza, aiming to freeze the creature in place. Shigaraki just cackled, a sound like grinding glass. Too late, junior heroes. The event is almost over. The Noma dropped what was left of Deku's torso. He landed in the spreading pool of his own blood. He had one arm and one leg left. His vision was tunneling, the edges turning a fuzzy gray. He could hear Shigaraki talking, ordering the Noma to finish it. The creature raised its massive foot, preparing to stomp his head into paste. He was going to die. Here. Now. He'd saved Tsuyu. He'd saved Mr. Aizawa from another blow. But he'd failed. He wouldn't be the symbol of peace. He wouldn't even be a pro-hero. He'd be a footnote. The UA student who got torn apart at the USJ. Mom. I'm sorry. He thought of her face, of her tears when he got into UA, the proud wobble in her voice. He was going to break her heart. All Might. I'm sorry. I wasn't worthy. He thought of the man who had given him this chance, this dream. He had squandered it. He had broken himself on the first real test. One for all, this sacred torch was about to be extinguished with him. He closed his eyes. He was so cold. Boom. The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of reality being punched in the face. The main doors of the USJ, the massive, reinforced steel gates, were blown inwards, torn from their hinges as if they were made of paper. They flew 100 feet into the facility, crashing into the far wall, and standing in the ruined doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, was a figure that radiated righteous fury. His iconic 2 tufts of hair were pointing to the sky, but his body was wreathed in steam, his muscles impossibly tense. The signature, ever-present smile was gone. In its place was a rictus of absolute, bone-chilling rage. His blue eyes, usually so full of hope and vigor, were narrowed into slits of burning, apocalyptic wrath. He was not smiling. The ambient noise of the USJ, the villain's taunts, the students' cries, died instantly. A heavy, sacred silence fell over the dome. Shigaraki, who had been reveling in his victory, slowly turned. His scratching stopped. His red eyes widened, and for the first time, a sliver of genuine fear pierced his haze of psychopathy. We were a party of heroes, All Might's voice boomed, but it was different. The usual cheerful baritone was gone, replaced by a low, guttural growl that promised nothing but pain. And we have come to join the game. His eyes scanned the scene. They passed over the scattered villains, the terrified students, the defeated Aizawa. And then they landed on the crimson lake in the center of the plaza. They landed on the small, broken form of his successor, lying mangled and dismembered in a pool of his own blood. The air temperature in the USJ dropped 10 degrees. The rage that had been simmering in All Might's expression erupted. It was a physical force, a pressure wave of pure killing intent that made villains hundreds of feet away stumble and fall to their knees. You! He whispered, but the sound carried across the entire facility. What have you done? He wasn't there to be a hero. He wasn't there to save the day. He was there to avenge his son. He vanished. One moment he was at the door, the next he was in front of the Noma. There was no "I am here." There was only the sound of a thunderclap as he moved faster than the eye could see. "Nomu," Shigaraki squeaked, his voice trembling. "Kill him!" The Noma swung, its fist a speeding wrecking ball. All Might met it with his own. The resulting shockwave was not a blast, it was an earthquake. The ground itself cracked. The dome's glass panels, already damaged, spiderwebbed and shattered, raining down like glittering snow. The Noma's shock absorption was legendary. It was designed to tank a 100% punch from All Might. It was not designed to tank 300 of them. All Might didn't fight with style or grace. This wasn't a plus-ultra spectacle. This was a demolition. It was a blur of fists, each one landing with the force of a tactical missile. Left hook, right cross, uppercut, body blow. The sounds were brutal, percussive thuds that shook the very foundations of the building. You dare. Boom. To touch him. Boom. To break him. Boom. The Nomu, for all its engineered perfection, was overwhelmed. Its regeneration couldn't keep up with the sheer totality of the destruction being visited upon it. Its limbs were being pulverized into paste faster than they could reform. He's cheating! Shigaraki shrieked, clawing at his face in a panic. This wasn't in the stats. He's supposed to be getting weaker. But All Might wasn't fighting with the fading embers of One for All. He was fighting with the inferno of his grief and rage, burning his remaining time like rocket fuel. With a final, bellowing roar that was more animal than human, All Might drove his fist deep into the Noma's torso. He grabbed its spine from the inside, and with a heave that cracked the very air, he hurled the creature. The Nomu, a broken mass of flesh and bone, shot upwards like a missile, smashed through the glass ceiling of the dome, and disappeared into the blue sky, a rapidly shrinking speck. Silence. The only sound was All Might's heavy, ragged breathing, steam pouring from his body. He stood there, his back to the students, his fists clenched, trembling with adrenaline and rage. Then, the tension left him, his massive shoulders slumped. He slowly, carefully, turned around. He fell to his knees beside Deku's body. The other pros, Snipe, Ectoplasm, and Cementos, were pouring in now, quickly subduing the terrified and demoralized villains. But All Might saw none of it. His world had shrunk to the broken boy at his feet. Young Midoriya, he whispered, his voice trembling, broken. He reached out a shaking hand, gently touching Deku's hair, matted with sweat and blood. He looked at the carnage. The stumps where limbs should be. The pale, waxy skin. The shallow, almost non-existent breaths. Deku's eyes fluttered open. His vision was a blurry mess of yellow, blue, and red. All Might. He was here. He was safe. Everyone was safe. All Might. The words were a faint, wet whisper, carried on a bubble of blood. A faint, terrible smile touched his lips. You came. Tears, hot and fat, streamed down All Might's face, carving clean paths through the grime. I'm here, my boy. I'm here. Just hold on. Just hold on. The other students were approaching now, a slow, horrified procession. Uraraka was openly sobbing, held up by Ida. Bakugo stood apart, his hands smoking, his face a mask of pale, sickened shock. The medics swarmed in, led by Recovery Girl. The diminutive old hero took one look at the scene, at the extent of the damage, at the sheer volume of blood lost, and her professional demeanor crumbled. Her face went slack with horror. She knelt, her hands hovering over Deku's body, her quirk ready. But she stopped. Her expression was one of utter devastation. All Might looked at her, his face pleading. Chio! Heal him! Please! She slowly shook her head, her lips trembling. She looked at All Might, her eyes filled with a terrible, profound pity. Tashinori, she said, her voice barely a whisper. A person's stamina is the fuel for my quirk. To heal injuries this catastrophic, to regrow 3 limbs and repair the catastrophic internal damage, it would take more energy than his entire body possesses. It would kill him faster. She reached out and placed 2 fingers on Deku's neck, searching for a pulse. She held them there for a long, silent moment. There's nothing left to heal, she stated, her voice flat with finality. The tissue damage is absolute. The blood loss is too severe. His heart is failing. In Deku's fading consciousness, the sounds became muffled, distant. He felt a gentle hand in his hair. All Might's hand. It was the only thing he could feel. It was okay. All Might was here. It was going to be okay. He took one last, shallow breath, and let it out. The world went black. Recovery Girl pulled her fingers away. She looked up at the circle of horrified faces, at the weeping symbol of peace cradling the body of his student. Time of death, she announced, her voice cracking with a grief she could no longer contain. 1426. He's gone. The silence of a hospital waiting room is a unique and terrible thing. It is not an absence of sound, but a presence of quiet, a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from grief, anxiety, and the sterile hum of fluorescent lights. It was a silence that Tashinori Yagi knew all too well from his own long, painful history with medical facilities. But this time, it was different. This time, the silence was an accusation. He sat hunched on a cheap vinyl chair, the deflated, skeletal form of All Might lost in a ridiculously oversized suit. The fabric was stained. A dark, rust-colored patch marred the cuff of his left sleeve. Izuku's blood. He hadn't been able to bring himself to change. Changing would mean accepting that the day was over, that what had happened was a fixed point in history. So he sat there, a monument to failure, staring at the polished linoleum floor as if it held the secrets to turning back time. He was late. The words echoed in the hollows of his skull, a 2-word mantra of self-flagellation. He had been held up, caught by a multi-car pileup that reeked of a minor villain attack, a calculated diversion. By the time he'd arrived, by the time he'd broken through the doors of the USJ, the damage was done. He had unleashed a storm of fury on the Nomu, a rage so profound it had burned through his remaining time like tissue paper in a furnace. But it was a hollow victory. He had not been there to save his boy. He had only been there to avenge him. Across the small room, Inko Midoriya sat perfectly still. She wasn't crying anymore. The storm of her grief had passed, leaving behind a devastation so complete that there was nothing left to be moved by the wind. Her eyes, the same vibrant green as her son's, were vacant, fixed on a point on the opposite wall. A nurse had tried to give her a sedative an hour ago, but she hadn't even seemed to register the woman's presence. She was a statue of sorrow, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were bone white. Toshinori wanted to say something, to offer a word of comfort, but what could he possibly say? "I'm sorry" felt like an insult. He was a hero was a truth that had cost her everything. He was the one who had set her brilliant, kind-hearted boy on this path. He had painted a target on his back and named it Hope. The weight of that responsibility was a physical thing, crushing his already frail ribs, making each breath a gasp of ash and regret. The door to the waiting room slid open with a soft hiss, breaking the spell. Two figures entered, their presence immediately altering the atmosphere. One was a woman in a severe, impeccably tailored business suit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that brooked no argument. Her face was a mask of cold professionalism, her eyes scanning the room and landing on him with unnerving precision. He recognized her aura, if not her face, the Hero Public Safety Commission, in its most unfeeling, bureaucratic form. The other was a man. He was tall and slender, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that looked more expensive than Toshinori's apartment. His hair was the color of dark silver, slicked back from a high forehead, but it was his eyes that held the attention. They were a startling, pale silver, like polished steel, and they shone with a terrifying, restless intelligence. They flicked from Toshinori to Inko, then back again, not with sympathy, but with an unnerving, analytical curiosity. He looked less like a mourner and more like a biologist who had just stumbled upon a fascinating new specimen. "All Might," the woman said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "My name is not important. I represent the Commission. This," she gestured to the man, "is Dr. Eris Thorne." Dr. Thorne gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "A tragic day," he said, his voice a smooth, modulated baritone that held no trace of warmth. "A great loss. For everyone." Toshinori's temper, already frayed, began to smolder. "If you've come to offer condolences on behalf of the HPSC, you can save them," he rasped, his voice a low growl. "We don't need your platitudes." The woman's expression didn't flicker. "We are not here to offer platitudes, All Might. We are here to offer a solution." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Toshinori's lips. "A solution? My student, my successor, is dead. What solution is there for that, short of a time machine?" Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his silver eyes locking onto Toshinori's. "That is a surprisingly accurate, if crude, analogy," he said. "Time is the variable we cannot alter. The physical vessel is irretrievable. However, the essence of the individual, the consciousness, the personality, the memories, that is another matter entirely." Toshinori stared at him, bewildered and angry. "What in God's name are you talking about?" "He's talking about Project Chimera," the commissioner interjected, her tone clipped and direct. "A top-secret, black-budget initiative under the joint oversight of the HPSC and Thorne Advanced Cybernetics. Its goal, for the last decade, has been to create the ultimate hero, a vessel capable of withstanding any attack, of wielding any quirk, of following any order, without the frailties of a human body." The words hung in the air, cold and monstrous. "You're talking about a weapon," Toshinori said, disgust lacing his voice. "An android. A gynoid technically, given the intended baseline model, but the principle is the same," Thorne corrected him smoothly. "The project has been a remarkable success in terms of hardware. We have a body, a chassis of unparalleled strength and resilience. What we have lacked, what we could not manufacture, is a soul. A will. The indefinable quality that makes a hero. The ghost in the machine, if you'll forgive the cliché, He paused, letting the implication sink in. Young Midoriya provided us with an unprecedented opportunity. His display at the USJ was textbook. The perfect heroic mindset, self-sacrificial to a fault, unwavering resolve, a quirk of immense, body-destroying potential. He is, in every conceivable metric, the perfect candidate. Toshinori felt a cold dread snake its way up his spine, colder than any winter's day. Candidate for what? He's gone, is he? Thorn's lips curved into a thin, predatory smile. Clinically, yes. His body failed. But consciousness, All Might, is merely a complex pattern of electrochemical signals. Data. At the moment of clinical death, that data does not simply vanish. It dissipates. Our estimates give us a window of approximately 4.7 minutes before synaptic decay becomes irreversible. We were well within that window. A memory, fragmented and chaotic, surfaced in Toshinori's mind. In the bloody aftermath at the USJ, after Recovery Girl's devastating pronouncement, another team had arrived. Men in black, sterile uniforms, moving with quiet, unsettling efficiency. They had swarmed around Izuka's body, pushing the other medics aside. He remembered seeing a strange, metallic device, a sort of cranial clamp, being fitted over his boy's head. He'd been too lost in his own grief to process it, assuming it was some advanced, desperate medical procedure. Aizawa, being loaded onto a stretcher, had seen it too. "What are they doing?" he had demanded, his voice weak. "Who are those people?" One of the black-clad figures had injected something into Izuka's neck, and a faint, blue light had pulsed under the skin. A low hum had filled the air as they activated a portable stasis field around his head. "Cortical preservation is active," one of them had said into a comms unit. "Synaptic mapping is stable. We have him." At the time, the words had been meaningless technobabble. Now they were a prelude to a nightmare. You did something to him," Toshinori whispered, rising unsteadily to his feet. "At the USJ. Your people. We saved him," Thorn stated, his voice ringing with the unshakable conviction of a zealot. "Or rather, we preserved the part of him that matters. His entire neural network, the complete architecture of his consciousness, has been cryopreserved and mapped. Every memory, every thought, every nuance of his personality, down to the last quantum state. We have Izuka Midoriya on a hard drive, All Might. And we have a new body waiting for him." The room spun. Toshinori grabbed the back of his chair for support. This was madness. This was something out of a science fiction horror story. They weren't talking about saving a life. They were talking about making a copy. A digital echo. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That's not him. It would be a machine with his memories." "A puppet, would it?" Thorn challenged, his gaze sharp. "Where does the self reside, All Might? In the flesh and blood that fails you? In the organs that decay? Or in the will, the spirit, the sum total of your experiences? We are offering to give his spirit a new vessel. A better one. The Chimera Chassis MK.I is constructed from a carbon nanoweave alloy, powered by a semi-permanent beta-voltaic cell. Its myomer fiber musculature can replicate the full range of human motion with 10 times the strength and speed. It feels no pain. It does not bleed. It does not break." He leaned in, his voice dropping to an intense, conspiratorial whisper. "Imagine it, the unwavering heroic spirit of Izuka Midoriya, fused with a body that can withstand the full, unrestrained power of One for All. From the very first day. No more broken bones. No more self-destruction. Only pure, undiluted power, wielded by a boy who has already proven he is worthy of it. We can not only save your successor, All Might. We can perfect him." The temptation was a poisoned chalice, but God, how it glittered. The guilt that was crushing Toshinori eased for a fraction of a second, replaced by a desperate, terrible hope. A way to undo his failure. A way for the legacy of One for All to survive. A way for his boy to live. But the cost. The sheer, terrifying morality of it. "And what's your price?" Toshinori asked, his voice rough. "The HPSC doesn't do favors." The commissioner stepped forward again. "The project continues under our exclusive purview. The hero Deku becomes an asset of the commission. His maintenance, his upgrades, his deployments, all managed by us. He will be the perfect symbol, one we can guide, one who will not be swayed by public opinion or personal sentiment. A hero who could be controlled. A soldier. That was their endgame. They wanted to take Izuku's pure, untainted spirit and chain it to a weapon they could point wherever they wished. It was a monstrous perversion of everything the boy stood for. No, Toshinori said, the word like a stone in his throat. Absolutely not. The alternative, the commissioner said, her voice as cold as a morgue slab, is a headstone and a eulogy. The legacy of one for all dies with a mangled 15-year-old boy in a hero's school gymnasium. The choice is yours, All Might. A controlled symbol of peace, or no symbol at all. He was trapped. They had him, and they knew it. His duty as the bearer of one for all warred with his love for the boy he had come to see as a son. To let the quirk die was unthinkable, but to subject Izuku to this existence, was a cruelty beyond measure. Then, a small, choked sound came from across the room. It was the first noise Inko Midoriya had made in hours. They all turned to her. She was looking at them, her vacant eyes slowly regaining a sliver of focus. She had heard. Through the fog of her grief, she had heard. My son, she whispered, her voice cracked and raw from disuse. You can bring him back? Dr. Thorne's demeanor softened, a calculated, artificial shift into something resembling compassion. He knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. Mrs. Midoriya, he said gently. We cannot restore what was lost. His body is gone. But his mind, his spirit, everything that makes your Izuku, we have it. We can give him a new form. He can wake up. He can talk to you again. He can continue his dream. Toshinori stepped forward, a protest on his lips. Inko, you must understand, it's not that simple. Can I hear his voice again? She asked, her gaze fixed on Thorne, her eyes welling with desperate, heartbreaking hope. Can he still smile? Thorne hesitated for a fraction of a second. His vocal patterns can be perfectly replicated. His new face has mimetic capabilities to express emotion. He will be different, yes. But he will be him. It was a lie wrapped in a technical truth. A beautiful, poisonous lie. Toshinori saw the conflict in Inko's eyes. The horror warring with a mother's bottomless need to not have lost her child. To condemn her son to a life as a machine, or to condemn him to the grave. An impossible, sadistic choice. It is the only way, the commissioner said softly, twisting the knife. Inko looked from Thorne's reassuring face to Toshinori's tormented one. She saw the doubt and horror in his eyes, but she also saw his desperation. Then she looked back at the empty spot on the wall, and the abyss of a future without her son yawned before her. An endless expanse of silence and sorrow. Yes, she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Do it. Please. Bring my baby back to me. The commissioner produced a sleek data pad and a stylus from her briefcase. We require your legal consent. As his sole guardian, you must sign over full medical and custodial authority to project Chimera. Toshinori watched in sick fascination as Inko took the stylus. Her hand trembled so violently she could barely hold it. With a ragged sob, she scribbled her name at the bottom of the screen. The digital ink glowed a sterile blue, sealing the pact. Dr. Thorne stood up, his face once again a mask of cool, scientific triumph. Excellent. We can begin the consciousness cascade immediately. He should be online within the hour. He and the commissioner turned and left, leaving Toshinori alone with the hollow shell of a woman who had just sold her son's ghost to save herself from the silence. The weight on his chest was heavier than ever. He had not only failed to save his boy, he had just stood by and allowed him to be damned. The laboratory was a cathedral of the unnatural. It was a vast, circular chamber deep underground, miles from the hospital, miles from anywhere. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a seamless expanse of pristine white, bathed in the shadowless, clinical glare of overhead light panels. There was no dust, no sound save for the quiet hum of life support, and the gentle whirring of server banks that lined the outer circumference. It was a womb and a tomb, all at once. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, lay the Chimera chassis. It was both beautiful and terrifying. Its form was humanoid, slender but with a defined, powerful musculature suggested by the plates of its gunmetal gray shell. Intricate seams crisscrossed its body, hinting at the complex machinery beneath. Along its limbs, faint traceries of what looked like wiring glowed with a soft, internal blue light. Its hands were elegant and deadly, the fingers long and articulated. Its feet were solid, designed for stability and power. Its head was smooth and featureless, save for a faceplate that was a stylized, androgynous approximation of a human face. There was a suggestion of a nose, a mouth, and cheeks, but it was all smooth, unbroken metal. Where the eyes should be, there were two dark, optical lenses. It was an empty vessel, waiting. The synaptic map is stable. The neural architecture is fully rendered, a technician in a white lab coat announced. Dr. Thorne stood at a master console, his silver eyes gleaming with feverish excitement. He looked like a conductor about to begin his magnum opus. The body is prepped. All systems are green. Begin the consciousness cascade on my mark. He looked at the main screen, which showed a swirling, three-dimensional representation of Izuku Midoriya's brain, a complex web of light and energy. It was beautiful. The culmination of his life's work. We are about to witness the birth of a new age, people, Thorne said, his voice resonating with theatrical gravitas. The fusion of man and machine. The next step in human evolution. Begin the cascade. A technician flipped a switch. On the screen, the glowing neural map began to flow, streaming like a river of light through digital channels towards another icon representing the Chimera chassis. A high-frequency tone filled the room, rising in pitch. The blue traceries on the chassis began to pulse, faster and faster. For a long minute, that was all that happened. The light flowed. The body pulsed. And then it stopped. The transfer was complete. Silence descended upon the lab once more, heavier this time. Every eye was on the metal figure on the dais. Nothing happened. Report, Thorne demanded, his voice tight. Cascade complete, Doctor. All data transferred successfully. The consciousness is integrated. It's in there. Then why isn't it active? The neural handshake is complete, but it's not initializing. It's like a computer that's been turned on, but the operating system won't boot. The consciousness is dormant. Inactive. Thorne's face darkened. Impossible. Run diagnostics. As the technician scrambled, a thought occurred to him. A variable he hadn't considered. The boy had died. He hadn't just gone to sleep. His last moments were of unimaginable pain and the acceptance of his own end. The core consciousness is trapped in its last recorded state, Thorne murmured to himself. The state of death. It doesn't know it's allowed to wake up. He strode to a smaller console next to the dais. Give me manual access to the primary sensory input. Doctor? Do it! He keyed in a command. Initiating a forced sensory reboot. A jump start. Let's give our ghost a reason to open its eyes. Black, not darkness, which is the absence of light. This was black. The absence of everything. A perfect, silent, timeless void. There was no thought, no feeling, no self. There was only nothing. It was not peace. It was not terror. It was the absolute zero of existence. Then, a flicker, system boot. Initializing core consciousness matrix. The words were not heard or seen. They simply were, appearing in the void like code written on the fabric of reality itself. Biometric scanners. Offline. Pulmonary function. Offline. Cardiovascular system. Offline. System status. Catastrophic failure. The memory of it hit him like a physical blow. The noma. The pain. The tearing of limbs. The cold spreading through him. All might's enraged, grief-stricken face. I'm dead. The thought was calm, a simple acceptance of fact. This void was death. This was the end. Override command detected. Initiating forced sensory reboot. Audio sensors. Online. A sound bloomed in the silence. A low, persistent hum. The sound of machinery, of power flowing through circuits. It was the first thing he had perceived in, he didn't know how long. Time had no meaning here. Optical sensors. Online. Calibrating, the blackness shattered. It wasn't like opening his eyes. It was like a million shards of light stabbing into his brain simultaneously. A flood of raw, unfiltered visual data. A white ceiling. Bright lights. The world resolved itself not into a smooth image, but into a pixelated grid, overlaid with text and symbols he didn't understand. Luminosity, 850 lux. Ambient temp, 22.1 degrees Celsius. Atmosphere, 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, 1% trace gases. He was seeing the world as a data stream. Confusion warred with a primal fear. Where am I? Is this the afterlife? He tried to move, to sit up. The thought, the pure mental command, sit up, was sent. And something obeyed. With a soft whirring of servos, his torso bent at the waist. He was sitting up. He looked down, and the world tilted on its axis. He saw legs. Long, metallic legs, the color of gunmetal. They weren't his. He was wearing some kind of suit, he thought frantically. Some kind of armor. He tried to move his arm, to look at his hand. The command was sent. An arm lifted into his field of view. It was not his arm. It was a machine's arm. Polished gunmetal gray, with intricate seams where the forearm met the elbow, and the wrist met the hand. He could see faint blue light pulsing beneath the semi-transparent plating. He flexed his fingers. The metal digits, long and unnervingly elegant, curled and uncurled in perfect synchronization with his will. Panic, cold and sharp, began to cut through his confusion. This wasn't armor. This was him. He brought his other hand up. It was the same. He looked down at his chest. A smooth, plated torso, the suggestion of pectoral muscles rendered in cold, hard alloy. No costume. No skin. A wave of vertigo and nausea, or the phantom sensation of it, since he no longer had a stomach, washed over him. He reached up with his right hand to touch his face, to feel something familiar, something human. His metal fingers made contact with his cheek. The sensation was a lie. He felt nothing from the skin on his face, because there was no skin. He felt nothing from the nerves in his fingertips, because there were no nerves. Instead, a small data packet appeared in the corner of his vision. Pressure detected, 2.1 N, contact point, facial plate, quadrant 3. A strangled gasp caught in his throat. But he had no throat. He had no lungs. The impulse to gasp was just a dead signal in his brain. He's awake, a voice said. Dr. Thorne's voice. Distant. Subject is conscious and responsive to stimuli. Subject? Bring the mirror, the voice commanded. One of the white-coated figures he could now see moving around the room wheeled a tall, polished mirror in front of the dais. It was angled so he could see himself. The panic became a tidal wave of pure, absolute horror. Staring back at him was not a Zucchamidaria. Staring back at him was a machine. A monster. An android out of a nightmare. Its body was a sleek, metallic mockery of a human form. But the face was the worst part. It was a smooth, genderless mask of metal, its features only hinted at. And where his wide, expressive green eyes should have been, there were two glowing, green optical lenses. They stared back at him, devoid of life, devoid of soul. They were the eyes of a thing. This wasn't him. This couldn't be him. He remembered everything. His mother's cooking. The feeling of the sun on his skin. The rough texture of his All Might figurine. The sting of Bakugo's explosions. The soaring hope when All Might had told him, "You can become a hero." All those memories, all those feelings, they belonged to a boy of flesh and blood. A boy with freckles and a wild mop of green hair. A boy who broke his bones and cried. That boy was dead. And this thing, this puppet of metal and wire, was looking back at him with his mother's eyes, rendered in cold, dead light. The horror overwhelmed him. The grief, the confusion, the soul-shattering terror of his own non-existence, it all crested at once. He had to let it out. He had to scream. He had to shatter the silence of this sterile white hell with the full force of his despair. He opened his mouth, or rather, the hinged seam on his faceplate that passed for a mouth, and screamed. His brain sent the command, the raw, primal signal for a lung-tearing, throat-shredding shriek. But he had no lungs. He had no throat. He had no vocal cords. His vocalizer, a complex synthesizer in his chest, received the chaotic, high-amplitude signal. It didn't know what to do with the pure, undiluted emotion. It tried to translate it. And it failed. The sound that erupted from him was not human. It was a deafening, horrifying blast of synthesized, electronic static, a shriek of glitched audio, corrupted data, and dial-up modem tones from hell, modulated by the pure terror of his silent, screaming soul. It was the sound of a ghost trapped in a machine, clawing at the walls of its new prison. It was the sound of Izuku Midoriya breaking all over again. The shriek of corrupted data echoed for a full 10 seconds before his vocalizer overloaded and shut down, plunging the lab back into a ringing silence. In the void left by the noise, Izuku Midoriya, or the entity inhabiting his former consciousness, slumped forward, his metal hands clenching and unclenching spasmodically. His optical sensors, glowing a haunted green, stared at their own reflection in the polished floor. Dr. Eris Thorne pressed a hand to his temple, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his features. Well, he said, his voice tight, the emotive subroutines clearly require significant calibration. The system interpreted a peak emotional distress signal as a raw audio dump. Fascinatingly catastrophic. He sounded like a mechanic diagnosing a faulty engine, not a doctor witnessing a soul-shattering existential crisis. Get him to the diagnostic suite, Thorne commanded his technicians. Sedate the consciousness. A technician approached Izuku hesitantly. Doctor, how do we? Input command code Morphus 7 into his central processor via the spinal port. It will induce a low-power dormant state. Think of it as putting him to sleep. Before the technician could act, a new voice, synthesized and flat, filled the room. No. The word was quiet, toneless, yet it carried an undeniable weight of finality. Izuku pushed himself up, his movements stiff and unpracticed. He looked at Thorne, his glowing green optics narrowing slightly in a simulated expression of defiance he wasn't even aware he was making. I will not be turned off, he said, the words coming out slowly as his vocalizer rebooted, each syllable a carefully constructed digital sound. Thorne raised an eyebrow, a spark of scientific delight replacing his annoyance. It speaks. It learns. It asserts itself. Marvelous. He held up a hand to his technicians. Very well, Subject 1. Let's not call it sedation. Let's call it rest. Your neural map has just undergone a trauma equivalent to being ripped out of one reality and pasted into another. Your core matrix needs time to defragment. He gestured towards a door that hissed open on the far side of the lab. Your quarters. Izuku stood, his new body feeling impossibly heavy and foreign. He took a step. His brain, relying on a lifetime of muscle memory, sent signals expecting the familiar response of muscle, tendon, and bone. Instead, it received feedback from gyroscopic stabilizers, myomer fiber actuators, and pressure sensors in his feet. The conflict between expectation and reality was dizzying. His leg shot out too far, the joint locking with a soft click. He overcompensated, and his entire 250-kilogram frame began to topple forward. He didn't stumble. He fell, a rigid, articulated doll crashing towards the floor. He threw his arms out instinctively, but there was no instinctive reflex speed. He could only watch as the pristine white floor rushed up to meet his face. The impact was a jarring, metallic clang that reverberated through his chassis. A data log scrolled across the top of his vision. Impact detected. 24G. Facial plate. No structural damage. He felt no pain. Only a profound, soul-crushing humiliation. From the floor, he looked up at the technicians, some of whom had their hands over their mouths, trying to stifle a reaction that was half pity, half unease. He was a freak show. His proprioceptive feedback loop is unsensed from his core consciousness, Thorne observed aloud, tapping a finger on his chin. He still thinks he's a 55-kilogram boy. The machine and the ghost are not yet on speaking terms. This will be the first lesson. The weeks that followed blurred into a grueling, monotonous hell. The diagnostic suite was his room, his school, and his prison. It was a 10 by 10 meter cube of seamless white material. There was no bed, only a large, recessed alcove in the wall that was a wireless charging station. There was no window. His only company was a rotating staff of white-coated technicians and the ever-present, watchful silver eyes of Dr. Thorne. His days were a blur of therapy, both physical and psychological, though to him they felt one and the same. The first lesson was walking. Every morning, he would stand in the center of the room, and Thorne would instruct him from an observation booth. "Forget your legs, Subject 1, Thorne's voice would echo from hidden speakers. "You don't have them anymore. You have locomotive pistons governed by a central balance gyroscope. Don't try to walk. Will the action of moving forward. Let the machine do the work." It was easier said than done. His brain rebelled. He would try to take a step and end up lurching like a broken automaton. He fell hundreds of times. Each fall was a loud, graceless clang of metal on the floor, a constant, noisy reminder of what he had become. He learned to dread the sound. After 3 days of continuous failure, something shifted. In a moment of pure frustration, he stopped trying to walk and simply thought, "I need to be over there." His legs moved. It was a strange, gliding motion, unnervingly smooth and perfectly balanced. The whirring of the servos in his hips and knees was the only sound. He had done it. He had walked. But it didn't feel like walking. It felt like he was a passenger in a vehicle he was piloting with his mind. Next came fine motor skills. A technician placed a simple wooden block on a table before him. "Pick it up," Thorne instructed. Izuku reached out his metal hand. He focused, channeling all his will into being gentle. He remembered holding his mother's hand, the fragility of it. His fingers, elegant and strong, closed around the block. Crunch! The wood splintered and collapsed into dust and splinters in his palm. Pressure threshold exceeded. Max grip strength applied, 1,500 psi. He stared at the wooden dust, a cold dread washing over him. He hadn't squeezed. He had barely intended to touch it. "Your haptic feedback is purely data-based," Thorne explained, his voice patient as if lecturing a child. "You don't feel pressure, your sensors report it. You intended to apply the pressure required for a flesh-and-blood hand. Your new one is exponentially more powerful. You must relearn your own strength from zero. Try again." They brought him another block. Then another. Then a glass of water, which he shattered, sending water splashing harmlessly against his leg. Then a pen, which he snapped in two. Each failure was a fresh wave of despair. He was a walking disaster, a bull in the china shop of the world. He started to keep his hands clenched into fists, afraid of what they might inadvertently destroy, afraid of himself. His voice was another source of constant torment. Thorne's team had installed a top-of-the-line vocalizer, capable of mimicking pitch, tone, and cadence. But it had to be learned. He spent hours with a speech therapist, not learning to speak, but learning to perform emotion. "Say I am happy," the therapist, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, would instruct. "I am happy," Izuku would say, and the words would come out in a dead, robotic monotone. "No, no," she'd say gently. "Your core matrix is broadcasting the emotional intent of misery and frustration. The vocalizer is trying to average it out. You must consciously modulate the output. Think of it like a musical instrument. Access the joy subroutine. Raise your pitch by a few semitones on the word happy. Try to smile." He would try, sending a command to his facial plates. The metal would shift, the seam of his mouth curving upwards in a ghastly, unfeeling imitation of a smile. He saw it on a monitor once and almost threw up, if he still had the capacity to do so. It was the face of a killer doll from a horror movie. The most insidious torture, however, was the phantom sensations. His new body felt nothing. It didn't get hot or cold. His internal cooling system handled that, and his HUD just displayed the ambient temperature. It couldn't feel a soft breeze or the sting of a slap. It was a fortress of numb metal. But his mind remembered. He would be standing in his charging station, perfectly still in the silent room, and suddenly feel a phantom itch on the back of his neck. He'd reach up to scratch it, his metal fingers scraping uselessly against the metal plate. The itch would remain, a maddening, untouchable ghost. He'd feel the phantom sensation of his heart pounding in his chest when he got frustrated, a phantom lump forming in a throat he no longer possessed. He'd feel the phantom ache of hunger in a stomach that was now a beta-voltaic power core. Worst of all, he would feel the phantom sensation of breathing. He'd feel the familiar rise and fall of his chest, the ghost of air filling his lungs, but he knew it wasn't real. He didn't need to breathe. He could exist in a vacuum. He was a machine. His mind was simply playing a recording of a life that was over. He was a ghost, and his entire lost body was the phantom limb he could never be rid of. Sometimes, in the dead of the night cycle, the phantom pains of his last moments would return. He'd feel the searing agony of his arm being torn from its socket, the wet, horrific rip of his leg being pulled away. His internal diagnostics would remain placidly green. All systems nominal, but his mind would be screaming, trapped in an endless replay of its own destruction. One day, Toshinori Yagi came to visit. All Might entered the diagnostic suite in his skeletal form, looking smaller and more fragile than ever against the sterile white walls. He saw Izuku standing perfectly still in the center of the room, staring at his own metal hands. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice soft. Izuku didn't turn. "That's not my name anymore," he said, his synthesized voice flat. "My designation is Subject 1. Or Chimera. Take your pick." All Might flinched as if struck. "Don't say that. You are Izuku Midoriya, am I?" Izuku finally turned, his glowing green optics fixing on his mentor. Izuku Midoriya had freckles. He had messy green hair that his mom was always trying to tame. He broke his bones when he used your quirk. He could cry when he was sad and laugh when he was happy. He could feel the warmth of a hug. He held up his metal hand. "This body feels nothing. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get hungry. It doesn't get hurt. It just exists. The things inside my head, the memories, the feelings, they belong to a boy who died at the USJ. They're like old movies playing in an empty theater. They don't connect to anything real." He took a step closer to All Might, the soft whir of his servos the only sound. "I feel an itch on a nose that's just a metal plate. I feel my lungs drawing in air that I don't need. My mind is a ghost haunting a body that isn't mine. So I'll ask you again, All Might." His voice, despite its synthesized nature, seemed to crack with a phantom desperation. "Am I still me? Or am I just a machine with his memories? A copy? A ghost?" Toshinori's heart ached. He saw the boy he had chosen, the boy with more heart than anyone he had ever met, trapped in this existential nightmare. He wanted to give him an easy answer, a simple yes, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The lie would be too thin. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his damaged lungs. "When I met you," he began, his voice raspy but firm, "on that rooftop you were quirkless. You were just a boy. But you ran into danger to save your friend when all the pro-heroes, myself included, stood by and did nothing. You moved before you could think." "Why?" Izuku's optics remained fixed on him. "Because my body moved on its own." "Exactly," All Might said, a flicker of the old fire in his eyes. "It was your will. Your spirit. The unshakable, illogical, heroic desire to save someone in need. That is the core of who you are. It's the reason I chose you. That has not changed. This body," he gestured to Izuku's chassis, "is a vessel. It's different, yes. Horribly different. But the will that pilots it, the spirit that moved on its own to save young Bakugo, the spirit that pushed itself to the breaking point to save young Azui, that is still you. As long as that will remains, you are Izuku Midoriya. You are my successor." Izuku was silent for a long time. His internal fans whirred softly. He looked down at his hands again, not with horror this time, but with a new, hesitant contemplation. The will. The ghost. Maybe that was the part that mattered. "The quirk," Izuku said, his voice barely above a whisper. "One for all. Can I still use it?" All Might's expression turned grim. "That is the next test. Dr. Thorne believes this body can handle it. He's eager to find out." The testing chamber was a brittlest concrete cube 50 meters on each side. The walls were 3 meters thick, reinforced with steel rebar and latticed with energy-dampening filaments. It was a place designed to contain Armageddon. Izuku stood in the center, facing a massive wall of plasteel-reinforced concrete. All Might and Dr. Thorne watched from a shielded observation deck high above. Theoretically, The Chimera chassis is the perfect conduit for One for All, Thorne said, his eyes glued to the monitors displaying Izuku's diagnostics. The myomer fiber musculature can handle kinetic forces that would turn bone to dust. The energy can be distributed across the entire frame, preventing any single point of failure. He should be able to access 100% output with zero physical damage. And the spiritual side of it? All Might asked, his voice low. One for All is more than just power. It's a torch, passed from one will to another. Metaphysics is not my field, All Might, Thorne said dismissively. I deal in measurable quantities. Let's see what our boy can do. Subject 1, you may proceed. Target the far wall. Full power. Down on the floor, Izuku took a steadying stance, his metal feet planting themselves firmly. My will is my own. All Might's words echoed in his new, silent mind. One for All was the ultimate expression of that will. It was his connection to his mentor, to the legacy he had inherited. He closed his optical sensors and reached inward, searching for that familiar, swelling power. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing but the cold, logical hum of his own systems. Then, he found it. A tiny, flickering ember, buried deep beneath layers of code and wiring. It felt distant, muted, like a voice shouting from across a vast canyon. He focused all his will on that ember. He remembered the desperation at the USJ, the righteous fire of All Might, the hope for the future. He pulled. The effect was instantaneous and violent. Warning. Unidentified high-energy surge detected in power core. System voltage exceeding safe limits. Emergency shunts engaged. Diverting excess energy to chassis frame. Temperature spike detected in all major servos. Risk of myomer fiber degradation. His HUD exploded with red warning signs and error messages. His internal systems were screaming at him, identifying One for All not as a part of him, but as a hostile virus. A catastrophic power surge that threatened to tear him apart from the inside. The feeling was bizarre, a war being fought within his own body, the cold, logical machine trying to contain the blazing, spiritual fire of the quirk. He ignored the warnings. He focused on the fire. Green lightning, more vivid and ferocious than ever before, erupted across his body. It wasn't just arcing off his skin, it was crawling through the seams of his armor, illuminating the wiring beneath, turning him into a living Tesla coil. The air around him crackled and hissed, the ozone smell thick and sharp. He drew his right arm back. His joints whirred, protesting the strain, but they held. One for All, 100%, he threw the punch. His arm shot forward, moving so fast it was a blur of gray and green. He didn't shout a name. This was a silent, grim test. His fist broke the sound barrier halfway to the wall. The crack of it was deafening. Then came the impact. There was no explosion of rock and dust, not at first. For a microsecond, the point of impact on the 10-foot-thick wall glowed white-hot. Then, the entire wall simply ceased to exist. It wasn't blown apart, it was atomized. The kinetic force was so focused, so absolute, that it disintegrated the plasteel and concrete on a molecular level, creating a perfectly circular, 10-foot hole through which the gray wall of the chamber beyond was now visible. The shockwave that followed was a secondary effect, a blast of displaced air that peeled the remaining concrete from the rebar around the hole and sent a tremor through the entire facility. Up in the observation deck, Dr. Thorne stared, his mouth agape. A datapad slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor, forgotten. My God! He whispered. The force output it's off the scale. It's an order of magnitude greater than we projected. All Might stared, a mixture of pride and profound sadness on his face. This was the power he had dreamed of for his successor. Unrestrained. Perfect. And utterly inhuman. Down below, Izuku slowly lowered his arm. The green lightning subsided, the warning messages in his HUD fading from red to yellow. He looked at his fist, then his arm. It was perfect. Not a scratch. Not a dent. The metal was not even warm. The seams were intact. His internal diagnostics returned to a calm, steady green. Structural integrity, 99.8%. Minor stress detected in shoulder actuator. Force output, classified. Recommendation, apply lubricant to shoulder joint at next maintenance cycle. He felt nothing, no satisfying recall. No painful breakage that told him he had pushed his limits. No triumphant surge of adrenaline. There was no exhilaration, no sense of accomplishment. He had just unleashed a power that could level a city block, and his only feedback was a recommendation for joint lubrication. It was the most powerful he had ever been, and the most empty he had ever felt. In the ringing silence of the chamber, he tried one last thing. He closed his eyes again and reached inward, not for the power of one for all, but for the other thing he had just begun to sense before his death. The presences. The faint whispers of the past users, the vestiges. He reached into the digital static of his own mind, past the firewalls and subroutines, searching for that flicker of other souls. He found nothing. There was only silence. The cold, sterile, absolute silence of the machine. The spiritual connection, the living chain of wills that defined one for all, had been severed. The wire connecting him to the past had been cut. The ghosts in the machine were gone. There was only him. A single, lonely ghost in a brand new shell. His shoulders, powered by silent servos, slumped. He stood in the center of the destruction he had wrought, a figure of immense power and infinite isolation, truly and utterly alone. The decision to return Izuku Midoriya to UA High School was not a simple one. It was a maelstrom of legal battles, ethical debates, and logistical nightmares that raged for 2 weeks in the highest echelons of the hero world. The HPSC, led by the same severe woman who had brokered the deal with Inko, argued for keeping him isolated, a controlled asset to be deployed like a scalpel. They saw him as Project Chimera, Subject 1, a weapon too valuable and too dangerous for the unpredictable environment of a high school. But Principal Nizu, All Might, and a surprisingly ferocious Shota Aizawa argued back with equal force. Nizu, with his unsettlingly calm logic, pointed out that a hero's development is not merely about power, but about social integration, ethical reasoning, and learning to work with others, lessons that could not be taught in a sterile lab. Aizawa, his face still crisscrossed with fresh scars from the USJ, was more blunt. You want to turn a child into a drone, he'd stated in a meeting, his voice flat and cold. That's not creating a hero. That's creating a villain's origin story. He needs his friends. He needs a semblance of the life you stole from him. In the end, a compromise was reached, heavily influenced by All Might's immense public sway and Nizu's subtle political maneuvering. Izuku would return to Class 1A. He would participate in all classes and training exercises. However, he would be under constant, remote monitoring by Dr. Thorne's team. He would also be required to wear a modified P uniform at all times, a garment designed not for comfort, but for function. It was a dark, almost black bodysuit made of a conductive, self-repairing polymer, with subtle seams that corresponded to the maintenance access panels on his chassis. It was sleek, efficient, and utterly devoid of the cheerful heroism of his old costume. It made him look less like a student and more like a special ops soldier from the future. The day of his return, the air in the Class 1A classroom was thick with a nervous, expectant energy. The official story they had been told was vague and unsettling. They knew Midoriya had been critically injured. They knew he had undergone a radical, experimental treatment. But the reality of those words was something none of them could truly comprehend. The homeroom bell rang, and Aizawa entered, his movements still a bit stiff. The usual boisterous energy of the class was muted. They watched as he stood at the podium, his tired eyes scanning their faces. "All right, settle down," he began, his voice its usual monotone drawl, though it held a new layer of weariness. "As you know, Midoriya has been absent recovering from the USJ incident. His recovery is complete. He will be rejoining us today." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "However, the nature of his treatment was extreme. Things are going to be different. Your job is to treat him with respect, to not make this harder for him than it already is. Do not stare. Do not ask insensitive questions. Just be normal. As normal as you people can be." The classroom door slid open, and Izuku Midoriya walked in. A collective, silent gasp rippled through the room. It wasn't a sound of shock. It was the sound of 20 teenage minds simultaneously failing to process what they were seeing. This was not the Midoriya they knew. The boy who had walked through that door a month ago had been a nervous, slightly hunched figure with a constellation of freckles and a perpetually worried expression. He was a ball of frantic energy, and mumbled apologies. The being that stood before them now was something else entirely. He was taller, his posture unnaturally perfect. The dark uniform hugged a frame that was lean but powerful, its lines too clean, too symmetrical. His movements were silent and gliding, the whirring of his internal servos too faint to be heard from a distance. But it was his face that caused the world to tilt. His wild green hair was gone, replaced by a smooth, gunmetal gray head. His freckles were gone. His expressive, emotional face was gone. In its place was the cold, androgynous mask, the featureless plates of metal hinting at a human visage beneath. And set within that mask were the two glowing green optical lenses, sweeping across the room, taking in every detail with an unnerving, analytical stillness. He looked like the ghost of their friend, haunting a suit of armor. Mina Ishido's hand flew to her mouth. Kaminari's jaw was slack. Kirishima, who had witnessed the beginning of the Noma's brutal attack, felt a cold knot of guilt and horror tighten in his stomach. Even Todoroki, usually so stoic, had a flicker of disbelief in his mismatched eyes. Izuku walked to his empty desk, the one between Uraraka and Ida. His movements were precise, economical. He sat down not with the familiar slump of a tired teenager, but with a controlled, fluid motion, his back perfectly straight. The silence in the room was so absolute it felt like a physical pressure. Achiko Uraraka was the first to break. She stared at him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. This was Deku. He had to be, but the friendly warmth, the nervous energy that had always radiated from him, was gone, replaced by a chilling stillness. She remembered their last conversation before the USJ, him blushing and stammering. She remembered him saving her from the zero-pointer. That was Deku. This thing, this construct. She had to know. Tears welling in her eyes, driven by a desperate need to connect, to feel that he was still in there somewhere, she stood up. Deku, she whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could stop her, she closed the distance between their desks and wrapped her arms around him in a hug. It was like hugging a marble statue in the dead of winter. His body was cold. Not cool, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to suck the warmth right out of her. It was unyieldingly hard, the metal plates of his torso digging into her. There was no give, no subtle shift of muscle, no reciprocal warmth of a body returning an embrace. There was no heartbeat. No gentle rise and fall of breath. It was like hugging a lamppost. For Izuku, the sensation was 1,000 times worse. His surface sensors registered the contact instantly. Contact detected. Multipoint pressure. Source Uraraka Achiko. Analysis. Gesture identified as hug. Emotional intent, affection, grief, concern. But he felt nothing. He remembered hugs. He remembered the warmth of his mother's embraces, the comforting pressure, the feeling of safety. His mind screamed at him with the phantom sensation of it, a ghost memory of warmth and softness against his skin. But his body, his real body, reported only pressure and temperature differentials. The conflict was a nauseating wave of digital static in his mind. Worse, his threat assessment protocols, programmed by Thorne's team, were blaring warnings. Unexpected proximity. Potential for subject harm. Risk of inadvertent force application. He remembered the wooden block turning to dust in his hand. What if he moved wrong? What if a stray signal caused his arm to twitch? He could break her spine without even trying. Panic, cold and logical, seized him. His body, reacting to the overriding command of prevent harm, flinched back. The movement was slight, but on his rigid frame, it was a powerful, definitive rejection. He pushed her away, his metal hands coming up in a defensive posture. Don't, he said, and his synthesized voice, flat and devoid of the warmth she was so desperate to hear, cut through the silence. It is unsafe. The rejection was more brutal than a physical blow. Uraraka stumbled back, her face a mask of hurt and confusion. The tears she had been holding back now streamed freely. She sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Ida, ever the class representative, stood up, his hand chopping the air in a gesture of conflicted duty. Uraraka, You must respect his boundaries. Midoriya, welcome back. Your safe return is a boon to us all. Your new form is a testament to the marvels of modern support technology. Ida's words were meant to be welcoming, to bridge the horrifying gap that had just opened up. But to Izuku, they only highlighted his otherness. Support technology. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a piece of equipment. He looked at Ida, then at Uraraka's shaking form, and a new kind of data flooded his senses. Emotional response detected: guilt, regret, isolation. He had hurt her. He had tried to protect her and, in doing so, had wounded her more deeply than he could have imagined. He opened his mouth to apologize, but what could he say? I'm sorry, I didn't want my superpowered robotic arms to accidentally crush your ribcage? The words died in his vocalizer. He just turned forward, his green optics dimming slightly as he stared at the front of the classroom, a solitary island in a sea of his former friends. The rest of the day was a study in awkwardness. In every class, he was the ghost at the feast. He didn't need to take notes. His memory was now eidetic, every word a teacher spoke permanently recorded. He didn't fidget. He didn't get distracted. He just sat, perfectly still, a silent, watchful sentinel whose presence made everyone else profoundly uncomfortable. The true test came that afternoon, during heroics class. The venue was Ground Beta, the sprawling urban cityscape used for their first combat training exercise. All Might was there, in his muscle form, though the smile on his face was strained, the shadows under his eyes deeper than usual. All right, Shonen. Today's exercise will be a team-based rescue scenario. He boomed, his voice lacking its usual infectious cheer. There are civilians, robotic dummies, trapped in a collapsing building. One team will be the heroes, tasked with rescue and stabilization. The other will be aftershocks, villains seeking to exploit the chaos. Your goal is to minimize casualties and property damage. The teams were drawn. By some cruel twist of fate, Izuku was paired with Bakugo. A low growl rumbled in Katsuki Bakugo's chest. He had been watching Deku all day with a toxic cocktail of emotions churning in his gut. Revulsion, anger, pity, which was the most infuriating feeling of all, and buried deep beneath it all, a sliver of terrifying guilt. He had been there at the USJ. He had seen the Nomu tear Deku apart. He remembered the sickening sounds, the sight of his childhood rival being dismantled like a broken doll. For a horrifying moment, Bakugo had been frozen, not by fear, but by sheer, unadulterated shock. He, who was always moving, always exploding, had just stood there. And now this thing was back. This walking corpse, this machine wearing Deku's ghost like a cheap suit. It was an affront to everything Bakugo understood about strength. Strength was about pushing your limits, screaming your defiance, bleeding for your victory. This machine didn't have limits. It didn't feel. It was a cheat. Don't you get in my way, you goddamn scrap heap, Bakugo snarled as they stood at the starting gate, his voice a low hiss. I don't need a walking tin can to win this. Izuku's optical sensors turned to him. My designation is Deku, he stated, his voice flat. My objective is to complete the mission with maximum efficiency and minimal casualties. I will coordinate with you to that end. Your emotional state is suboptimal for effective teamwork. I recommend regulating your adrenaline levels. Bakugo's hands started to pop and crackle with tiny explosions. You piece of shit, he seethed. You think you can analyze me? You're not Deku. You're just a broken toy someone put back together wrong. The starting buzzer blared before Bakugo could launch himself at his partner. They were the hero team. I have identified the primary structural stress points of the target building, Izuku said, his voice completely ignoring Bakugo's tirade. A schematic of the building appeared in his HUD, glowing red lines indicating imminent collapse points. There are 3 civilians on the 4th floor, 2 on the 2nd. Optimal extraction path is through the west-facing wall on the 4th floor. I will create an entry point. You will provide cover from the aftershock team, Todoroki and Yaoyorozu. Without waiting for a response, Izuku took off. He wasn't running. He was moving with a terrifying, piston-driven gait that ate up the ground at a speed that would have left Ida in the dust. He reached the base of the crumbling 7-story building in seconds. Executing plan, he announced into his comms, a statement of fact, not a request for confirmation. He bent his knees and leaped. He didn't soar. He launched. He shot upwards like a missile, a gray and black blur, landing with a soft, metallic thud on the side of the building on the 4th floor, his feet and hands clinging to the sheer concrete wall like a spider. In the observation room, the other students stared in stunned silence. "He's climbing the wall?" Cyril whispered, his own tape-based abilities seeming quaint by comparison. Bakugo, left on the ground, stared up, his rage momentarily eclipsed by sheer disbelief. "Show off," he growled, before blasting himself into the air to follow. Izuku's hand glowed with the faint green light of One for All, channeled to a precise 8%. He wasn't smashing. He placed his palm against the concrete and sent a controlled, high-frequency vibration through it. The concrete around his hand turned to dust, sloughing away to reveal the steel rebar beneath. He then curled his fingers around the rebar and, with a groan of protesting metal, tore a man-sized hole in the side of the building. He swung inside. The room was filled with smoke and debris. 3 heavy, human-sized dummies were pinned under a fallen concrete beam. Analysis. Beam weight approximately 4.5 tons. Dummy integrity, critical. He walked over, braced his legs, and simply lifted the beam. He didn't strain. He didn't grunt. His servos whirred softly as he hoisted the massive slab of concrete and tossed it out of the hole he had just made. It crashed to the street below with a deafening boom. He then methodically picked up the 3 dummies, one under his right arm, one under his left, and one held delicately in his right hand. He was a machine performing a task. Just then, a wave of eyes shot through the opening, encasing the far wall. Todoroki had arrived. "Midoriya," Todoroki's voice called from outside. "Surrender the civilians." Bakugo flew past the opening, firing a massive explosion back at Todoroki to keep him busy. "I told you to provide cover, you damn icicle! Get away from my partner!" he roared, the word partner tasting like ash in his mouth. Izuku, holding the 3 dummies, simply walked to the hole he'd made. "Extraction proceeding," he said into his comms. He looked down. It was a 40-foot drop. He jumped. He landed on the ground below with the grace of a cat, his legs bending to absorb the impact with a soft hiss of hydraulics. He hadn't even jostled the dummies. He placed them gently in the designated safe zone. 3 of 5 civilians rescued. He turned to go back for the others just as Yayorozu, perched on a nearby rooftop, launched a volley of flashbang grenades she had created. They detonated in midair, a blinding flash and deafening roar designed to disorient a human opponent. Izuku's optics instantly polarized, negating the flash entirely. His audio sensors dampened the sound to a dull thud. He didn't even flinch. He just kept moving. "Flashbangs are ineffective," he stated calmly over the comms, as if providing a weather report. "Yayorozu's position is compromised. She is on the rooftop, 75 meters northeast." Bakugo, momentarily blinded and deafened himself, let out a scream of frustration. "Stop telling me what to do!" he yelled, firing off random explosions to cover his recovery. Izuku ignored him and launched himself back up to the 2nd floor, tearing another hole in the wall. He retrieved the last 2 dummies just as the building's primary support columns, timed to fail, finally gave way. The entire structure began to groan and collapse inwards. Any other hero would have scrambled for safety. Izuku did not. He stood in the collapsing building, holding the 2 dummies, his optical sensors glowing brightly as he scanned the cascading debris, calculating trajectory of falling debris, identifying safe path. A 3-dimensional map of the collapse appeared in his vision, glowing red lines showing the paths of the falling girders and concrete slabs. A single, narrow path of green snaked its way through the chaos. With a terrifying, inhuman precision, he began to move. He sidestepped a falling I-beam, ducked under a shower of bricks, and leaped through a gap between 2 collapsing floor plates, all while cradling the 2 dummies. He moved not with panic speed, but with the cold, efficient grace of a machine that knew exactly where every piece of the puzzle would fall. He emerged from the cloud of dust and debris just as the last of the building came down, not a single scratch on his chassis or the dummies he carried. He placed them in the safe zone. 5 of 5 civilians rescued. Hero team wins. Silence. The entire class, watching from the monitors, was speechless. They had just witnessed a display of power, precision, and efficiency that was beyond anything they had ever seen. It was a perfect rescue, it was flawless, and it was completely and utterly terrifying. There was no struggle, no passion, no desperate cry of a hero pushing their limits. There was only the cold, perfect execution of a mission. Bakugo landed nearby, his chest heaving, his face slick with sweat. He looked at the pristine, undamaged Deku, then at the mountain of rubble that was once a building. He looked at the placid, unmoving faces of the rescued dummies. They had won. It was a perfect score, and he had never felt more useless in his life. He had been a supporting character in the Deku show. All his explosions, all his rage, all his power, it had been irrelevant. Deku hadn't needed him. He hadn't needed anyone. He was a self-contained unit of absolute competence. The simmering rage in Bakugo's chest finally boiled over. This wasn't a victory. This was an insult. Is that what you are now? Bakugo snarled, stalking towards him. A fucking robot? A walking calculator? Izuku turned to face him, his green optics impassive. We completed the objective. Don't give me that objective bullshit. Bakugo screamed, getting right in his face, jabbing a finger at the metal plate of his chest. You think this is strength? Huh? This cold, dead nothing? There's no heart in it. No guts. The Deku I knew was a weak, crying, useless nerd, but at least he was a person. At least when he fought, he fucking bled for it. Pain is an inefficient biological response, Izuku stated flatly. This body is superior. It allows me to save people without limitation. That was the final straw. The casual dismissal of everything Bakugo valued, everything he believed made a hero strong, the struggle, the pain, the will to overcome it, it was too much. Then fight me for real, you damn machine! Bakugo roared, his hands lighting up with the force of twin suns. He didn't wait for an answer. He lunged, unleashing a full-power howitzer impact, his signature spinning explosive blast, right at Izuku's chest. He didn't care about the rules. He didn't care about the exercise. He needed to break through that cold, metal exterior. He needed to see a flicker of the real Deku, the rival, the person he had tormented and, on some deep, unacknowledged level, respected for his insane tenacity. Izuku's systems registered the attack instantly. Incoming attack. Kinetic and thermal energy. Lethal force detected. His body moved before his conscious mind could even process Bakugo's rage. It was not a dodge. It was not a block. It was a calculated, brutally efficient counter. His left hand shot out and clamped around Bakugo's wrist, the one generating the explosion. His grip was absolute, a band of steel. Simultaneously, his right foot swept Bakugo's legs out from under him. As Bakugo fell, Izuku used his momentum, twisting and pulling him off balance. In the space of a single second, Bakugo found himself slammed face down onto the pavement, his arm twisted painfully behind his back, held immobile by a grip he couldn't possibly break. The howitzer impact fizzled, the explosive energy dissipating harmlessly into the air. It was over before it began. A perfect, effortless takedown. Izuku knelt over him, his full weight pinning him down. He leaned in close, his featureless faceplate inches from Bakugo's ear. Combat is statistically inadvisable, Izuku's synthesized voice said, low and devoid of any emotion. Your attack pattern is aggressive and predictable. You telegraph your intentions with your emotional state. Against me, you would have a 3.7% chance of landing a significant blow before I incapacitated you. Do not attempt this again. He then released Bakugo and stood up, his posture once again perfect and relaxed. He turned and started walking back towards the observation area, leaving Bakugo sprawled on the ground, shaking not with rage, but with a horrifying, soul-deep humiliation. He hadn't been defeated. He had been processed. He had been analyzed, calculated, and dismissed like a faulty piece of equipment. The fight, the passion, the rage he had thrown at the machine had been met with cold, indifferent logic. And that was what finally broke him. Because it wasn't the Deku he knew. The Deku he knew would have fought back with tears in his eyes and broken bones. He would have screamed and struggled. He would have met his rage with his own desperate passion. This machine, this thing, had simply calculated that he wasn't worth the effort. And in that moment Bakugo felt a profound sense of loss. He hadn't just lost a rival. He felt like he had lost a fundamental part of his own world. The UE Sports Festival was more than a school event. It was a national spectacle, a cultural cornerstone. It was the modern equivalent of the ancient Olympic Games, a grand stage where the next generation of heroes showcased their potential to the entire world. Agencies scouted for sidekicks, corporations looked for endorsements, and the public looked for their next symbol of hope. The air always buzzed with an electric excitement, a promise of greatness. This year, however, the excitement was laced with something else, a morbid, intense curiosity. The whispers that had been circulating since the USJ incident had grown into a roar of public speculation. News outlets, hungry for a story, ran blurry, long-lens photos and speculative articles with sensational headlines. The cyborg of UA. Hero or horror? The boy who died and lived again. Izuku Midoriya had become a myth before he even stepped into the arena. When Class 1A made their entrance into the roaring stadium, the crowd's reaction was a physical force. The applause was thunderous, but it was uneven. As the camera zoomed in on him, a strange, bifurcated sound washed over the stadium. Half the crowd gasped in awe, their cheers taking on a new, fervent intensity. The other half fell silent, their faces a mixture of pity, fear, and profound unease. He walked with the same unnerving, gliding precision as always, his head held high, his glowing green optics scanning the massive crowd. He wasn't taking in the adoration, or the fear. His HUD was processing it all as raw data. Decibel level, 110. Crowd sentiment analysis, 48% positive. Awe, excitement, 35% negative. Fear, disgust, 17% neutral/uncertain. He was the main event. He was the freak show. He knew this with the cold certainty of a machine processing an input. The knowledge registered, but it didn't sting. It was just another variable in a complex equation. President Mick's voice boomed from the speakers, his usual enthusiasm tinged with a slight hesitation when he introduced the first-year representative, and giving the opening pledge, from Class 1A, Katsuki Bakugo. It should have been Ida, but after a class vote that had been deeply, uncomfortably divided, Bakugo had won by a narrow margin. He strode to the podium, his face a thunderous mask. He grabbed the microphone and glared at the entire student body. "I just want to say," he growled, his voice a low threat, "I'm going to win." A chorus of boos and jeers erupted from the other classes. Bakugo just smirked, a vicious, predatory expression, but his eyes, for a fraction of a second, flickered to the side, landing on the still, silent form of Izuku. It wasn't a challenge. It was a desperate declaration. He wasn't just vowing to beat everyone else. He was vowing to prove that his way, the human way, of blood, sweat, and screaming effort, was still superior. He was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The first event was, as always, the obstacle race. A brutal, 4-kilometer gauntlet designed to thin the herd. As President Mike screamed start, the tunnel became a bottleneck of bodies, a frantic scrum of students pushing and shoving. Izuku did not push. He did not shove. He simply stood still for 1.2 seconds. Analysis. Student cluster at tunnel exit creating temporal bottleneck. Optimal strategy, avoidance. While his classmates were fighting for position, he turned, placed his hands on the top of the tunnel entrance, and with a soft whir of servos, launched himself completely over the initial chaotic melee. He landed silently on the track beyond, already ahead of 90% of the participants. The first obstacle, the Robo Inferno. The massive zero-pointers from the entrance exam, repurposed as moving roadblocks. Students scrambled, froze, or tried to fight them. When Todoroki effortlessly froze one and ran through its legs, the crowd roared. Izuku didn't even slow down. His internal sensors mapped the robot's patrol patterns and structural weak points in a microsecond. He didn't see giant robots. He saw a physics problem. He ran straight towards one, and just as it brought its massive metal fist down, he leaped. His feet touched the robot's descending arm, he ran up its length, did a flip off its shoulder, and landed on the other side, his momentum unbroken. He had used the obstacle as a stepping stone. It was an act of such breathtaking, calculated grace that it looked less like an athletic feat and more like a scene from a high-budget action movie. The second obstacle, the fall, a canyon of deep pits connected by tight ropes. Tsuyu and Mina made it across with their quirks. Others struggled. Izuku's HUD overlaid a perfect trajectory across the chasm. Calculating jump vector. Required thrust, 78%. Wind resistance, negligible. He took a running start and simply leaped. He sailed through the air, a silent gray projectile, and landed perfectly on the far side, 100 meters ahead of the next competitor. He hadn't needed the ropes. The obstacle was irrelevant. The final obstacle, the minefield. The trick was to tread carefully, digging for the duds. This was where Bakugo and Todoroki, in their fierce rivalry, were blasting their way across, kicking up huge clouds of smoke and pink powder. Izuku arrived at the edge of the field. His optical sensors, switching to a thermographic view, saw the mines perfectly. Each active mine had a minuscule heat signature from its internal trigger mechanism. To him, the minefield was not a field of hidden dangers, but a clearly marked path of glowing red dots. He didn't tiptoe. He ran. He sprinted through the minefield at full tilt, his feet landing with impossible precision in the safe spaces between the mines. He weaved a perfect, serpentine path through the explosions being set off by Todoroki and Bakugo, the pink smoke billowing around him but never touching him. He looked like a god of war walking unscathed through a battlefield. He crossed the finish line a full 30 seconds before Todoroki, who had used a massive ice blast to propel himself and Bakugo. Izuku simply stood there at the end, his internal fans whirring softly to cool his systems, his chest not heaving, his body showing no sign of exertion. The stadium was silent for a moment, the collective minds of 100,000 people trying to comprehend what they had just seen. Then, a roar erupted. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. He hadn't just won. He had rendered the entire race, all its challenges and dangers, utterly meaningless. He was playing a different game, on a level no one else could even comprehend. The second and third events, the cavalry battle and the one-on-one tournament, followed a similar pattern. For the cavalry battle, no one wanted to team up with the 1 million point prize at first. They saw him as a target. But Uraraka, her earlier hurt now replaced by a grim determination to understand him, approached him. Ida, despite his misgivings, declared it his duty as class representative to support a classmate in need. And Mei Hatsum, from the support course, her eyes gleaming with manic glee behind her goggles, practically sprinted over. A fully cybernetic body. With a beta-voltaic power core and myomer fiber musculature. "Let me see your babies!" She had yelled, already trying to pry open a panel on his arm. Their team was an unstoppable force. Izuku, as the horse, was too fast to catch. His 360-degree sensor array made ambushes impossible. When other teams got close, Hatsum's bizarre gadgets created chaos, and Uraraka's zero gravity, used on Ida, allowed him to become a human cannonball with his reciprocal burst. They dominated, securing first place with ease. Izuku acted as the central processing unit, calmly directing his teammates, calling out enemy positions and tactics before they even happened. Team Tetsu approaching, 7 o'clock. Prepare for hardening assault. Uraraka, target their rider. Ida, prepare for evasive maneuver Gamma. He was the perfect leader. And a terrible teammate. There was no camaraderie, no shared thrill of victory. Only the successful execution of a strategy. The tournament bracket was announced. His first opponent was Hitoshi Shinso from General Studies. The boy with the brainwashing quirk. As they stood in the arena, Shinso smirked, a tired but confident expression on his face. "So you're the famous robot boy," he said, his voice laced with casual provocation. "Must be nice, having everything handed to you on a silver platter. A perfect body, immense power. Some of us have to fight for every scrap of recognition." He was trying to get a response. That was how his quirk worked. Any verbal reply, and the target was his puppet. Izuku's head tilted slightly. Analysis. Opponent's quirk identified as brainwashing. Activation requirement, verbal response. Strategy, maintain silence. He didn't reply. What's the matter? Shinso taunted, taking a step forward. Cat got your tongue? Or did they forget to install one? Silence. Come on, hero. Say something. Tell me how you're going to save everyone. Isn't that what you heroes do? Talk a big game? Izuku remained perfectly still, his green optics fixed on Shinso. He could see the boy's heart rate increasing on his biometric scanner. He could see the sweat beading on his brow. The crowd began to murmur, confused by the lack of action. What is he doing? Just say something. Kaminari yelled from the stands. Izuku took a single, gliding step forward. Then another. He began to walk towards Shinso, his footsteps silent on the concrete stage. Shinso's confidence began to waver. Say something, damn you! He yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. He had one trick, one powerful, life-changing trick, and this machine was simply refusing to play the game. Izuku walked right up to him, close enough that Shinso could see his own terrified reflection in the smooth metal of Izuku's faceplate. He raised a hand, not to strike, but with 2 fingers extended, he gently tapped Shinso on the chest. Then, with a strength that was terrifying in its casualness, he pushed. Shinso flew backwards as if he'd been hit by a car, tumbling end over end until he landed in a heap outside the ring's boundary line. Shinso is out of bounds, Midnight declared, her voice filled with surprise. Midoriya wins. Izuku turned and walked back to the center of the ring, his expression, or lack thereof, unchanged. He hadn't needed his quirk. He hadn't needed a strategy. He had simply identified the win condition and executed it in the most direct way possible. He had won, and in doing so, had completely invalidated his opponent's entire existence as a potential hero. From the stands, Aizawa watched, his expression grim. He recognized Shinso's potential, but he also recognized the brutal, cold logic of Izuku's victory. It was smart. It was effective. And it was cruel. The semi-final match was the one everyone was waiting for, Izuku Midoriya vs Shoto Todoroki. The prodigy of ice and fire against the cybernetic enigma. They faced each other in the arena, a palpable tension in the air. Todoroki's expression was a mask of cold fury, his breath already misting in front of him. This wasn't just a match for him. This was an ideological battle. He had seen Midoriya's file. He knew about Endeavor's involvement in funding some of Thorn's early research. To him, Izuku was the ultimate expression of his father's twisted philosophy, a being created and engineered for the sole purpose of being powerful, stripped of all humanity. He was everything Todoroki despised. I will not lose to a puppet, Todoroki said, his voice dangerously low. Especially not one my father had a hand in creating. The match began. Todoroki unleashed a tidal wave of ice, a glacier moving at incredible speed, aiming to encase Izuku completely. Izuku didn't move. He simply planted his feet. The ice crashed against him, burying him in a mountain of jagged frost. The crowd gasped. Incredible! Todoroki ends it in an instant. Present Mike screamed. But then, a deep, resonant hum filled the air. A fierce green light began to glow from within the ice mountain. Cracks appeared, spreading like lightning. With a deafening explosion of frost and steam, the ice mountain shattered from the inside out. Izuku stood in the center of the crater, completely unharmed. A thin layer of steam rolled off his body. External temperature, -30 degrees Celsius. Activating internal heating coils. Chassis temperature stable at 37 degrees Celsius. Your ice is insufficient, Izuku stated, his voice cutting through the cold air. Its thermal capacity is easily countered by my internal heating systems. Furthermore, your reliance on a single element is a critical tactical flaw. Todoroki gritted his teeth and sent another, more complex attack, massive spikes of ice erupting from the ground, trying to impale him. Izuku moved. He flowed through the forest of rising ice spikes like water. His movements were no longer just fast. They were predictive. His processors were calculating the trajectory of each spike before it even fully formed, allowing him to move to a safe space before the danger even manifested. He was untouchable. He closed the distance to Todoroki, who was now being forced onto the defensive, throwing up walls of ice that Izuku simply punched through, shattering them like glass. "Why do you hold back?" Izuku asked, his voice calm and analytical as he sidestepped a blast of ice. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pleading. He was diagnosing a problem. "My sensors indicate a massive thermal energy source localized on your left side. Your body temperature is dropping dangerously low. You are accumulating frost on your right side. This self-inflicted limitation is reducing your combat effectiveness by a calculated 62%. It is illogical." Todoroki roared in frustration and unleashed his biggest ice attack yet, a monumental wave that covered half the arena. Izuku met it head-on. He didn't smash it with one for all. He simply held up his hands, and the heating coils in his body glowed visibly through the seams of his armor. The ice melted on contact, turning into a massive cloud of steam that enveloped the entire stage. Through the thick mist, Izuku's glowing green optics appeared directly in front of Todoroki. "I have cross-referenced your quirk registration with Endeavor's public records," Izuku's voice said, a calm, synthesized whisper in the swirling steam. "The probability that your refusal to use your left side stems from psychological trauma related to your father is 97.8%. You perceive it as his power." Todoroki froze, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "You know nothing." "I know data," Izuku interrupted, his tone unchanging. "And the data is clear. Your quirk is half cold, half hot. It belongs to you. It is registered under your name. Your DNA determines its expression." His contribution was purely genetic, a biological starting point. Your will determines its use. To refuse to use your own power out of spite for its origin is an emotional, irrational response that places you and others at risk in a combat situation. "It is your power, Todoroki." Not his. It was the same message. The same words he would have spoken if he were still human. But the delivery changed everything. It wasn't a passionate cry from a friend trying to break through his pain. It was a cold, irrefutable diagnosis from a machine. It was a computer telling him his feelings were an error in his programming. And for Shoto Todoroki, who had spent his life trapped in the hot, messy, emotional prison of his father's ambition, this cold, hard logic was the one thing that could cut through it all. It wasn't Deku's friendship that saved him. It was his utter lack of it. It was the absolute, unfeeling truth, presented as a simple fact. "It is your power." Something inside Todoroki snapped. The years of repressed anger, pain, and resentment at his father were suddenly dwarfed by a new, towering rage. A rage at this thing for daring to reduce his entire life's struggle to a data point. A rage at himself for knowing, on some level, that the machine was right. "Shut up," he whispered, and then he screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure defiance. And for the first time in his life, he let go. His left side erupted. It wasn't just a flame. It was a star being born in the middle of the stadium. A roaring, uncontrolled inferno of white-hot fire exploded from his body, a column of heat and light that shot hundreds of feet into the air. The steam cloud vaporized instantly. The remaining ice on the stage sublimated. The heat was so intense that the crowd 100 feet away could feel it like a physical blow. Izuku was at ground zero. "Warning! Extreme thermal event detected. Ambient temperature exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. Chassis integrity compromised. External plating beginning to melt. Sensors overloading. Cooling system failure. Emergency shut." The warnings devolved into a scream of digital static. His HUD dissolved into a mess of corrupted pixels and error symbols. The world vanished. His audio sensors were blasted with the sound of a roaring jet engine, then went dead. His optical sensors flared white, then black. For the first time since his rebirth, he felt something. It wasn't pain. Pain was a signal, a specific set of data his brain was programmed to interpret. This was not data. This was pure, overwhelming chaos. It was the feeling of his very existence being unwritten. His systems, his code, his perfect logical world, it was all being consumed by a wave of raw, anarchic energy. He felt his processors lag, his core temperature skyrocketing. He felt the structure of his own mind beginning to buckle under the sheer, unprocessable sensory overload. It was the machine's equivalent of agony. In the observation booth, Dr. Thorne stared in horror, his face pale. "Shut him down!" "Abort the match!" he screamed, but it was too late. The wave of fire washed over Izuku's body. The crowd saw his metal form glow cherry red, then white hot. The sleek lines of his body began to distort and warp under the incredible heat. He was melting. Todoroki stood in the center of his own inferno, his face a mask of shock at what he had unleashed, the flames already starting to lick at his own skin. He had done it. He had used his fire, and he had just incinerated his classmate. But then, through the roaring flames, something happened. Izuku's body, glowing like a filament, began to pulse with a faint green light. It was one for all. But it wasn't being used for an attack. Deep within his consciousness, buried under the screaming static and error messages, the ghost of Izuku Midoriya was fighting back. He couldn't think. He couldn't calculate. All he had left was instinct, the instinct to survive. The will to endure. He wrapped the raw power of one for all around his core processor, using it not as a weapon, but as a shield, a spiritual firewall against the physical annihilation of his body. The green energy fought against the white-hot fire, a battle of pure will against pure power. The result was a catastrophic feedback loop. The entire stage exploded. A concussive blast of force and heat erupted outwards, shattering the stadium wall behind Izuku and creating a massive crater. Cementos, frantically trying to contain the blast, threw up wall after wall of concrete, only to see them vaporized. When the smoke cleared, the scene was one of utter devastation. Half the arena was a molten, glowing pit. Todoroki was slumped against a hastily made concrete wall, unconscious, his left side smoking and his right side covered in a thick layer of his own frost, having passed out from the exertion. And in the center of it all, Izuku stood. Or rather, what was left of him. He was no longer a sleek, perfect machine. His body was a twisted, blackened ruin. His left arm had been partially melted, the metal dripping like wax. His chest plate was warped and scorched, revealing the glowing, damaged machinery beneath. His faceplate was cracked, and one of his glowing green optics was dark. He was sparking, plumes of black smoke rising from his joints. He had won. He was still standing. But he was broken. He slowly turned his one working optic towards the stands, towards All Might. And for the first time, the light in that optic was not calm or analytical. It was flickering wildly, like a dying candle in a storm. It was the look of a machine that had just been forced to feel.